The 1970s weren't just a different decade, they were different rule books. Back then, life felt looser, fewer warning labels, fewer restrictions, a whole lot more figure it out yourself. We didn't think we were being reckless. We weren't breaking laws, because most of the laws didn't exist yet. Kids rode bikes without helmets down busy streets. Parents drove with babies in their laps. You could light up a cigarette almost anywhere, and nobody thought twice about it. What today would spark outrage, lawsuits, or at least a viral video was just Tuesday afternoon. Over time, regulations tightened, science caught up, safety standards evolved, and the world slowly wrapped itself in caution tape. Some changes saved lives, some just changed the vibe. So let's step back into a time when common sense replaced warning stickers, when risk was part of growing up, and when freedom sometimes came with fewer guardrails. Here are 13 things that were perfectly normal in the 1970s, but would get you in serious trouble today. In the 1960s, turning 18 didn't just mean you were technically an adult, it meant freedom, real freedom. In many states, you could legally walk into a local tavern, slide onto a vinyl bar stool, and order a beer without anyone blinking twice. High school seniors would celebrate graduation with pictures of draft. Nobody asked for an ID if you looked old enough, and most of the time, that was good enough. In some states, the drinking age was even lower for beer and wine. It wasn't seen as reckless. It was seen as a rite of passage. Fathers might even share a drink with their sons to teach them responsibility. Bars were community hubs, not scandalous hotspots. It wasn't until decades later, especially in the 1980s, when federal highway funding became tied to a 21-year-old drinking age, that everything changed nationwide. Suddenly, what had been ordinary became illegal almost overnight. Back then, having a beer at 18 wasn't rebellion, it was adulthood. Today, the thought sounds unimaginable, but in the 1960s, a rifle hanging in the back window of a pickup truck in the school parking lot didn't cause panic. It meant deer season had started. In rural towns especially, students drove themselves to school with hunting rifles or shotguns in plain sight. After the final bell rang, they'd head straight to the woods. Teachers didn't call the police. Principals didn't initiate lockdowns. It was simply part of life. Some schools even had official rifle clubs. Students practiced marksmanship under supervision in school-sponsored programs. Firearms were viewed as tools for hunting, for sport, not automatic threats. That doesn't mean nothing ever went wrong, but culturally, the mindset was different. Gun ownership was normalized and deeply woven into rural American identity. Over time, rising violence and national tragedies reshaped laws and perceptions. What once symbolized independence and outdoor life is now heavily restricted and strictly regulated. Back then, though, it was just another day at school. On warm summer evenings, neighborhood kids knew the sound, the slow rumble of the mosquito control truck creeping down the street, and instead of running away, they chased it. The truck sprayed thick clouds of DDT into the air, creating a fog that rolled through yards and sidewalks. Kids rode their bikes straight into it, barefoot and laughing, pretending it was battlefield smoke or spooky mist. Parents sat on porches waving, thinking nothing of it. The smell was sharp and chemical, but it was considered safe, even helpful. The goal was simple: kill mosquitoes, stop disease, protect families. It wasn't until years later that research linked DDT to environmental damage and serious health risks. Eventually, it was banned in the United States in 1972. But in the 1960s, nobody wore masks. Nobody issued warnings. It was just part of summer. Fireflies at dusk, the hum of cicadas, and a cloud of pesticide drifting through the neighborhood like evening fog. Fireworks in the 1960s weren't mild. They were miniature explosions, cherry bombs, M80s, silver salutes. These weren't decorative sparklers. They were powerful enough to shatter mailboxes and shake windows. Kids bought them from roadside stands and lit them with little supervision. The fuse burned fast. You had seconds to run. There was danger, and everyone knew it. Stories circulated about lost fingers and blown-off eyebrows. But somehow, that risk only made it more thrilling. Some kids dropped them into ponds just to see the blast underwater. Others tested how close they could stand before the boom. It was reckless by today's standards. And eventually, federal bans cracked down hard on high-powered fireworks in the late 1960s. But back then, the 4th of July sounded like artillery. And if your ears rang the next morning, that just meant you celebrated properly. Playgrounds in the 1960s weren't padded. They were metal, fast, and sometimes brutal. Merry-go-rounds spun so quickly, kids flew off like human projectiles. Sitting spins twisted you until the world blurred. Backyard twirlers left you stumbling across hard dirt, laughing and nauseous at the same time. There were no helmets, no rubber flooring, no warning labels about risk of injury. Just steel bars, concrete foundations, and fearless kids daring each other to spin faster. If you fell, you brushed it off. Maybe you cried, maybe you didn't. But the spinning started again 5 minutes later. Today's playgrounds are safer, softer, and carefully engineered. But something about those old metal contraptions created a wild, chaotic kind of joy that can't quite be replicated. Back then, dizziness wasn't a liability issue. It was half the fun. In the early 1960s, many cars didn't even come with seatbelts. And if they did, most people didn't use them. They were seen as uncomfortable, unnecessary, even paranoid. Parents piled kids into the back seat, sometimes 5 or 6 at a time, and nobody buckled up. Long road trips meant stretching out across the rear window shelf for a nap. Toddlers stood on the front bench seat next to Dad while he steered with one hand. The idea of a car seat? Practically unheard of. Driving was about freedom, not safety features. Chrome dashboards, thin steering wheels, and 0 airbags. Accidents happened, of course, and many were deadly, but culturally, risk was accepted as part of life. It wasn't until safety advocates pushed hard and federal regulations began mandating seatbelts later in the decade that attitudes slowly changed. Even then, enforcement took years. Back then, buckling up wasn't a reflex. It wasn't even a thought. In the 1960s, sticking out your thumb by the side of the road wasn't dangerous. It was normal. College students, soldiers on leave, even teenagers trying to get to the next town would hitchhike without much fear. Drivers picked up strangers as a matter of courtesy. It was almost a social contract. You needed a ride. Someone offered one. Gas was cheap. Highways felt open and optimistic. The country seemed connected by goodwill. Parents didn't always panic when their kids said they'd catch a ride. Of course, not every story ended well, but those dangers weren't yet part of the national conversation. It wasn't until high-profile crimes in the 1970s and 80s that hitchhiking became associated with real danger. Today, it's rare and often discouraged or illegal in certain areas. But once upon a time, the open road came with trust and a raised thumb. If this took you back to a time that feels almost unreal today, hit subscribe for more stories like this. And tell me in the comments, which one shocked you the most? Or what would never be allowed today?